All right, I'm going to go over the solutions for Unit 12.4 quiz. And what we have here is we have three functions lined up at the top, each in one of the types of forms. So the first one is in you have it in vertex form. Second one we have in factored form, and the third one we have in standard form. And I'm going to ask you to find certain things out about each one, and you do that based on the forms that they're in. So the first problem says indicate which of the following quadratics produce the widest and the narrowest parabola. So if we were to graph these, which one would be the widest, which one would be the narrowest? And here is the key. If A, so I'm gonna highlight A on each of these. Okay, so A is 2/3 on the first one. A is negative 1/3 on the second one, and A is 3 on the third one. Now we've definitely talked about the direction, right? If A is positive, it's going to open up. If it's negative, it's going to open down. But also A is what adjusts the width. The larger A is in terms of absolute value, so you ignore the negative and just look at how big that number is. The larger that is, the narrower the graph will be. And then the smaller it will be, in terms of just thinking positive, the wider it will be. So the widest one is the middle, because 1/3 is smaller than 2/3 and smaller than 3. The narrowest will be the third one, because 3 is the largest of the three options here. And we'll call this one the second. Actually, we don't even have to indicate. It just says indicate which ones are the widest and narrowest. We did that. All right, number 3, we want to find the y-intercept of each. And to find the y-intercept, we plug in 0 for x and solve for y. So in this first case, we get 2/3 times 0 plus a half minus 4/7. And forgot to square. And 0 plus a half is a half, and you square that, you get a fourth. So it's going to be 2/3 times 1/4 minus 4/7. You can reduce this. We end up with 1/6 minus 4/7. Need a common denominator. I'm going to multiply the first fraction by 7/7 and get 7/42 minus, and then the second fraction I'll multiply by 6/6 and get 24/42. 7 minus 24 is going to be 17, negative. And so our y-intercept is the point 0, comma, negative 17/42. For the next one, finding y-intercept, again, you plug in 0 for x, and we get y is negative 1/3 times 0 minus 2 times 0 plus 1/2. And so we're going to end up with positive 1/3 times 2 times a half is 1, so y equals 1/3. So 0, comma, 1/3 is our y-intercept. And for the last one, Standard form is always the easiest to find the y-intercept. There's really no work involved. You plug in 0 and you end up with, well, everything goes away. I'll show you that. So we got 3 times 0 squared minus 4/5 times 0 minus 1/2. And this is 0, this is 0, and we're just left with negative 1/2. So y is negative 1/2. And so 0 comma negative 1/2 is our y-intercept for the third one. Alright, next, number 4, we're asked to find the x-intercept. So in this case, you let y equal 0, and you solve for x. So in the first one, let's see, we got 0 is equal to 2/3 times x plus 1/2 squared minus 4/7. I'm going to add 4/7 to both sides. And then I'm going to multiply both sides by 3/2 to get rid of the 2/3. And I get 12/14 is equal to x plus 1/2 squared. I'm going to reduce the fraction to 6/7, and I'll switch sides here. I'll put x plus 1/2 squared equals 6/7. Take the square root of both sides and we get x plus 1/2 is, don't forget plus or minus sign, square root of 6 over the square root of 7. And in this case, we can't have a square root in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by square root of 7. And we get x plus 1/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 42/7. And 42, if you break that down, is going to be 7 times 3 times 2. There's nothing to do to simplify that further. So now subtract 1/2, and you get x is equal to negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 42/7. Let's work at getting a common denominator, which would be 14. So x is equal to negative 7/14 plus or minus 2 square root 47/14. And then make it one big fraction. Negative 7 plus or minus 2 root 14, sorry, root 47. Let me clean that up. So negative 7 plus or minus 2 root 42 all over 14. So we wanted the x-intercepts, and to finish this off, an x-intercept's a point, so one of them is going to be 0, I'm sorry, your x value first, so negative 7 plus 2 root 42 over 14, comma 0. There's one of them. And the other one's going to be negative 7 minus 2 root 42 over 14, comma 0. That's your second. Alright. In factored form, that's going to be the easiest form that we can use to find x-intercepts. So again, let y equal 0. You get 0 is negative 1/3 times x minus 2 times x plus 1/2. And you set each factor equal to 0, the factors that have x in them. So negative 1/3 is a factor, but there's no variable involved with that, so we ignore that negative 1/3. We're just going to grab the x minus 2, set that equal to 0, and the x plus 1/2, set that equal to 0. And you end up with x is 2, and x is negative 1/2. So my two x-intercepts will be 2, 0, and negative 1/2, 0. And for standard form, set y equal to 0. You get 0 is 3x squared minus 4/5 x minus 1/2. And I'm going to use the quadratic formula on this. I could also complete the square as well. I'm trying to think which I'd rather do. I'll use quadratic formula. And so I'm going to get rid of the fractions first here. I'm going to multiply everything by 10. So I get 0 times 10 is 0, 3 times 10 is 30, 4/5 times 10 is going to be 40 over 5, which is negative 8. And then 1/2 times 10 is 5. So we see that A is 30, B is negative 8, and C is negative 5. Now I'm going to use the quadratic formula on this. So x is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And that's the quadratic formula, something that you're going to want to have memorized for next year. And so we get positive 8 plus or minus square root of 64 plus, so we got 4 times 30 times 5. Well, 4 times 5 is 20, and 20 times 30 is going to be 600 over 60. Keep simplifying. So 664 all over 60. Now at square root of 664, let's try to simplify that. So that's going to be 2 times 3, 32. 2 times, let's see, $166. 2 times 81. 81's 9 times 9. So we got a pair of 9s, a pair of 2s. We're left with a 2. So that's going to be x equals 8 plus or minus 18 root 2 over 60. Now we're going to look to reduce this fraction. We're going to look at the 8, the 18, and the 60. Ask what you can do with all those. You can divide them all by 2, and you get 4 plus or minus 9 square root of 2 all over 30. And there's our reduced form. So our x-intercepts will be 4 plus 9 root 2 over 30, comma 0, and 4 minus 9 root 2 over 30, comma 0. Number 5 says find the equation for the axis of symmetry of the parabola for each quadratic. Alright, so the first one is in vertex form, and so it's really easy. You just take the, well, I'm going to do number 6 real quick here. You take the vertex, which is going to be negative 1/2 negative 4 over 7. That's our vertex. Just take the x value, so x equals negative 1/2. For the next one, we have factored form. So you're going to take your x-intercepts, which were, if we look back, you see 2 and negative 1/2, and you average them. So you add them together, 2 plus negative 1/2, and then you divide that by 2. And whatever you get, that's the center. That's where the axis of symmetry is going to be. So 2 is the same thing as 4 over 2 plus negative 1 over 2, all of that over 2. That's 3 over 2 divided by 2, which is the same thing as multiplying by a half. So we get 3/4. So x equals 3/4 is our vertex. Sorry, not our vertex, our axis of symmetry. To find our vertex, we can plug that back in, find our y value, and that's x. And so we get negative 1/3, 3/4 minus 2, and 3/4 plus a half. Keep working through that. I'm going to get a common denominator, so that's going to be 8 over 4. And here it's going to be 2 over 4. And we get negative 1/3, negative 5/4, positive 5/4. Multiply this together, we're going to get positive 25 over, we got 4 times 4 times 3, so 16 times 3, which is 48. So 25 over 48. So my vertex, x value was 3/4 from the axis of symmetry, and y value is 25 over 48. There's my vertex for that one. Alright, the last one, it's in standard form, and the quadratic formula again is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if you take off that square root part, this right here, the negative b over 2a, is the center, or is what's right in between your x-intercepts, which is the same thing as your axis of symmetry. So in this case I have b as negative 4/5, and a is 3. And so x equals negative b, it's a double negative there, over 2 times a. And I just simplify this, so we got 4/5 divided by 6, which is the same thing as times 1 over 6, and that's going to be 4 over 30. So x is 4 over 30. And find the the vertex. I plug x in to find the y value. So 3 times 4 over 30. I'm going to reduce that. Instead of 4 over 30, let's have 2 over 15, right? Easier to work with smaller numbers. You always want to reduce fractions when you can. Squared minus 4/5 times 2 over 15 minus a half. So that's going to be 3 times 4 over 225 minus 8 over 15 times 5, that's going to be 75, and minus a half. Keep going. The first one is going to be 12 over 225 minus, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3 to get a common denominator. So 75 times 3 is 225. 8 times 3 is 24. Minus a half again. Alright. 12 minus 24 is negative 12 over 225 minus a half. I'm going to reduce the 12 over 225. I can divide by 3 and get negative 4 over 75 minus a half. And now I need a common denominator here. So that's going to be 150. So I'll double the first top and bottom of the first fraction, get negative 8 150, and then minus, multiply top and bottom by 75, so 75 over 150, and that's going to be negative 83 over 150. Alright, now put it together. Our vertex, remember our x value that we plugged in was 2 out of 15, and then the y value is going to be negative 83 over 150. State the domain of each quadratic. Okay. The first row, it opens up because a is positive, right? So if it's opening up, and the lowest point is negative 4 over 7, so the domain, I was thinking range, domain's all real numbers for all of these. But the range, because it opens up, is going to be y is greater than or equal to negative 4 over 7. I'm grabbing the negative 4 over 7, it's the y value in my vertex. The next one opens down, so it's going to be all y values less than or equal to 25 over 48. Again, I'm grabbing the y value. And the last one opens up, so y is greater than or equal to negative 83 over 150. And there is the range of each of those. And that's it. That's it for the quiz. Hope things are going good.